Prop 19. So everybody's favorite topic, property taxes. If you didn't get enough property taxes last week, I'm going to drop some more on you. Okay, so right now what happens is if you live, Prop 13 created a situation where if you live in a home for a long time, you're paying based on a calculation, a 2% maximum inflation on the value of the property every year. That's what you get assessed on, right? If you sell it and buy a new house somewhere else, you get reassessed at the higher rate. So you'll end up, not the higher rate, the higher value, and you'll pay the same rate, but on a more expensive house. So your property tax bill will go up. So Prop 19, well, even before Prop 19, so some counties allow seniors and disabled and people who have been impacted by wildfires and things like that, natural disasters, they allow them to basically take their lower tax assessed value with them when they buy a new house, as long as it's not more expensive, I think, than the value of the house that you sell. Some counties allow you to do that across county borders. Like, so if you move from county A to B, you can do that. But I believe that you only get to do that once in your life, essentially. That's how it works right now. So Prop 19 would say that system of being able to kind of take your tax savings with you applies to anybody over 55, severely disabled, or people who are have homes that are destroyed by wildfire. And now they can go anywhere in the state and do that. And they can do it up to 3 times in their life instead of just the once, and only if the counties allow it. It also limits some tax benefits for property transfer between family members. So right now, if you basically give property to your children or whatever, you get to keep the same Prop 13 property value. So this would limit those types of tax benefits to only primary residences or farms. So right now you can actually transfer it to a child. You can transfer a rental property, for instance, and you get to keep your Proposition 13 tax protections. So those are the two main changes. So it basically expands that concept of taking your tax savings with you to a new home elsewhere in the state. And then it limits the amount of tax breaks that people get for transferring inside their family properties that are not used as primary residences or as farms. So the big people that are behind the funding of this campaign, is that a cat?
Yeah, this is my cat, River.
Oh, okay. So the people that have put a lot of money into this are the Association of Realtors.
Mm-hmm.
The realtors, from what I gather from reading, they would expect that this would increase the amount of home sales, because people would not be, especially seniors and disabled, would not be locked into their homes essentially in order to keep the property tax savings. So they would be free to move about the cabin, free to move about the state, and therefore would create more home sales and therefore more commissions for real estate agents. One part of the argument that's kind of interesting is that, one of the kind of, I don't want to say unanticipated, but one of the other impacts of this could be that seniors now have more incentive to downsize their homes and to free up larger homes for larger families. And so maybe it ends up working, helps a little bit on some of our housing problems, but I don't know how realistic that is as far as, what kind of impact it actually make. So yeah, the realtors, national and the state association of realtors, have already spent $40 million on
wow.
this. Yeah. So it's interesting. So on the one hand, so my thoughts now. On the one hand, I feel like we should get rid of the tax breaks for transfer of rental properties and not things that basically aren't your home or your livelihood, like that, like a farm. I feel like we should get rid of those. But I also don't agree that Proposition 13 is good for the state or even well, it's not good for the state, it's not good for the local agencies, because it limits the amount of money severely that is generated for public services, and it also creates a big inequality between people based not on wealth or any of that stuff, but based on the the date on which they bought their home.
Right.
So we went through the example last week of, somebody bought a house 20 years ago and somebody buys the same exact house next door. They're paying substantially more in their property taxes, even though the burden for services are exactly the same. They're exactly the same houses. So on the one hand, I don't agree that we should continue to allow more people to take their tax savings with them. But I do believe that we should get rid of the kind of the loopholes that allow rental properties and stuff like that to be transferred inside a family with tax savings. So to be honest, this one's I'm a little bit tossed up on.
Hmm.
I'm a little bit tossed up on. So
how are you going to resolve it?
I was hoping that you guys could help me.
Oh boy, sounds hideously complex.
I mean, I guess my gut is telling me go ahead and vote for it, because we'll get rid of it. To me, it's basically, do I say, hey, the downside of allowing everybody to take their savings with them, I think is kind of a good thing, in that it means that people don't have to just basically get stuck in the same house until they die
Sure.
if they want the property savings,
Mm-hmm.
property tax savings. But on the other hand, I'm like, well, I don't think that should be the way it should be anyway. So expanding it doesn't feel like a really good, smart thing to do.
Right.
And then it's up to people to make that decision, right? If you want to stay in your house for the property tax savings, stay in your house. If you want to go somewhere else, deal with it,
So I noticed
So
that
I
it
don't know.
that it applies to not only people 55 and older, but and people with disabilities, but people who have been affected by wildfires.
Mhm.
And this whole thing makes me think of I don't know if you remember this, but like back in the day in Oakdale, when the school district wanted to increase the size of the football field or whatever, or build an extra field, and so they eminent domained all of the land around the high school. Not all the land, but like a bunch of land around the high school, and all the people in those houses, which they were all kind of fairly low income houses
Yeah.
around the school there. So all
There's
these,
nothing fancy there.
yeah, they were, you know, I mean, all, you know, I'm sure they,
Aged. They were aged.
yeah, they were old houses, and both old houses and old people, and I remember at the time thinking, okay, so we're gonna kick all these people out of their houses, and we're gonna give them, I think, fair market value for their houses, because that's what the law was. But the houses are not great. And I remember looking it up online at the time, and the amount of money that they were going to get for their house would not have paid for a new house anywhere in Oakdale. And that just that concept bothered me so much, because you know, these people had made a home in a particular place, and they decided that that they wanted to live in Oakdale for whatever reason, and
Still not sure why, but they did. So I mean,
they did, right. So and they were being kicked out, and they would not have been able to. I mean, I guess they could have rented a house and stuff, but like they would not have been able to buy a new house in Oakdale at the amount of money that they were given for the house and for their old house. And in a way, that's true
I have
of.
to imagine that that would also mean they probably couldn't get a house anywhere in California.
I mean,
there might be
they probably
places
could have gone to
lower.
like Sonora or something. You know?
Like they'd have to go pretty far to get lower
Yeah.
property value than Oakdale.
No, I wouldn't say so, because I'd say there's some other communities relatively nearby that you could find cheaper property in.
Yeah. So they probably could
Alright.
have found yeah, exactly what Anthony said. In the surrounding area, they probably
I'm
could have
thinking
found a house.
Riverbank, yeah.
Anyway, not to pick on not to pick on cities in the Central Valley, but um, just that concept bothered me. And in a way, what this is kind of doing is offsetting some of that, not necessarily from eminent domain, but people who lose their house for no fault of their own, who are now priced out of living in a community that they or potentially priced out of living in a community that they want. Now,
Well, I do want to clarify. So right now, you can do that if your house burns down in a wildfire,
uh,
you're still allowed one time to take the Proposition 13 savings with you on a house of equal value in that county.
oh, okay,
So I mean, it's not that people have no options. It's just that their options are a little more limited.
I see. So, but
Yeah.
it's one and done.
It is, and like I said, this now expands it to the whole state, and you get to do it 3 times,
Okay. Uh,
which
uh,
I'm sure the
At this
realtors would
point,
love it if we.
what do you think the effect on school budgets is going to be?
Well, so part of the money is set aside to deal with part of the money that is generated in excess of what we have now is set aside for basically fire protection.
Mhm.
So the impacts on schools, I don't know. I mean, again, what this will do is it'll allow people to move into a community and not pay property tax based on the new value, right? But whatever their old value was, you know.
so I imagine
So
what this does is it, it it creates some fluidity, some liquidity in the availability of old people to move around the state and congregate, right? So I imagine we'll probably see cities, or at least portions of cities uh, that cater to
retirement communities.
retirement communities, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
with that, they're bringing their old tax base, which means that should that community decide to have a school, it's gonna be sort of starting out with kind of a lopsided. Yeah, exactly, right? Because now you're a big portion of your tax base is now artificially lower than where it should be.
Yeah.
And
Well, but to be fair too, that the demand on a school system that a retirement community is going to generate is not going to be much. I mean, because theoretically, if it's a retirement community, they're for the most part, I'm not saying everybody, but for the most part, they're not going to have school age children.
well,
Um,
I wouldn't be so quick on that. I mean, there are an awful lot of grandparents
Lem-
who are raising their
okay,
their grandkids.
sure.
Um, and
But I would imagine, though, statistically speaking, the number of children of school age per household is probably still going to be lower in those neighborhoods than in general neighborhoods.
sure.
Because some of the well, I'm going to take one here. There's a retirement community here in Manteca.
Mhm.
You have to be 55 plus to buy a house.
Right.
And as far as I know, you have to be essentially anyone that lives in the house has to be 55 plus.
Yeah.
Or can only be there for 2 months out of the year or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
so
my
those kinds of
grandparents are
communities,
part of one of those.
yeah. So in those particular types of communities, school age children is not going to be an issue.
Right.
But you can also imagine that, there's now expanded services that need to be provided to these new communities, and let's face it, medical, EMS calls and stuff like that. Those are not going to lessen. Those are going to be more.
Sure.
right? So the weird thing is, there's going to be a little bit of a wash here, and that there's going to be a little bit more property tax generated on inherited properties and a little less generated on, transactional sales.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's going to end up being a gigantic thing. Um, the legislative analyst office said basically that, there's going to be some positives and some negatives on the revenue side. But because some of the stuff goes to fire protection, it may not have a huge impact on local agencies,
Right.
including schools. So
Seems like there's an awful lot of opportunity here for unexpected consequences as well. You know, things that we just
there's gonna be a lot more commissions. That's what the real estate industry is banking on.
That's true. Potentially, also, it just moves us faster to breaking the property tax system. Right? If there's just
It's
more
accelerationism, right?
exactly, and so maybe that's ultimately a good thing, right? Because the faster we can get to breaking it, the faster we can get to fixing it. At least as the theory goes.
Yeah. Well, it's possible, but I think this is one that I'm struggling with a little bit because to me, there's a good and there's a bad.
Right.
But the bad is more like, well, at least now we're going to make it equitable for everybody, and that to me feels like a pretty good thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, to not say, okay, you're stuck in your county, well, but some counties allow it, some counties don't. So it's kind of like, well, that doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, that feels like it should be a statewide thing. So I guess I've talked myself into voting yes on this one.
this is not a cup of coffee for the next 30 years. This is a much more complicated issue. I'm glad you chose this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it, a lot of my opinion on this comes from, basically looking at Prop 13 and going, well, yeah, it's great for individuals,
Right.
but it's bad for society. And that's always a tough trade-off.
Sure.
So, okay, so yes on 19 for me.